Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, armor in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's not quite as elegant as other parts of the system. It's a place where abstraction meets well, actually, and while it's not quite as elegant, not quite as pleasing to the eye as other areas of the system, to me at least. At the end of the day, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it produces the effect that the designers of the game wanted it to produce. How's that for like a really obscure statement? But I believe, in fact, they did it. It did exactly what it wanted them, or they wanted it to do. And anyhow, just for a second, this video isn't about this, but I'd like to sort of apologize and give a disclaimer for some of the quality of some last few videos or so. I had one where there was, some 60 cycle hum because of a bad grounding, and one where it was a bad connection, so it was popping, and I felt really bad about that. And the last one, where I had I put the line for what it looked like for what D20 plus D6 looked at 4.5 instead of plus 3.5. And in a perfect world, I go back and redo those videos. And normally, what I was doing was recording videos and then uploading them. But listen, I got stuff going on in my life, and so I'd love to go and redo all those things, but I simply just don't have the time. So it is. Is exactly what it is at this point. So go over like how armor works and my impressions of how armor works and my impressions of how inelegant it is and how elegant it ends up being in some other areas. Now, of course, one of the first things that like miffed me right off the bat, and this is not 5th edition is not the first thing to do this, is certain types of armor don't allow your full dexterity adjustment. And I always have those words ringing in my head in this tome, from this tome, which is a mess, by the way. I love this book to death, but there's some parts of this that are just crazy. Dexterity armor class bonus. This bonus is an addition to that given by any other forms of protection. The type of armor worn by the character with a dexterity armor class bonus does not adversely affect this bonus, for it is assumed that his or her physical conditioning and training compensate otherwise. Now, this ain't that game. So, what exactly happens with armor? There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 types plus a shield. And, the first thing, well, let's take care of one thing that bothers me the most about armor. They talk about armor and the fact that if you are not proficient in armor, what happens with that is you immediately are at disadvantage to any strength or dexterity-based saving throws or any kind of ability checks, skill checks. So in order to not have that happen to you, you have to have proficiency in that armor. And there's various classes that are proficient in certain types of armor and various classes that are not. And there's certain racial things and what have you. And so, sometimes and they divide it into light, medium, and heavy armors. That's fairly elegant. However, let's go back a little bit when I was talking about how this game works. So every time you do something and you roll a d20, if you have proficiency, you add your proficiency bonus, right? Because you're proficient in it. Now with armor, when you're proficient in it, it has nothing to do with that. Why the insert word here? Did they use that word? And I don't care, it's because it was used in other editions. This should have been caught. Somebody in editing or whatever should have said, hey, dude, you cannot use the word proficiency because that's a very specific game-related word that means a specific thing, that means you add your proficiency bonus, and you do not in this case. It has nothing to do with that mechanic. Call it something else. Call it training. Call it competency. Call it, well, you can't call it expertise because that's also a game term. Come on, seriously, be consistent with this stuff and don't make a mistake like that. So that really ticks me off. That's just not something that should have ever left the printing presses. They should have fixed that because it's confusing and it doesn't need to be confusing, especially to a lot of new people who are going to pick this thing up and this is the first RPG they ever read. Anyhow, I'm going to get off that soapbox. Let's go back to how armor actually works. So let's see, you've got padded, leather, and studded that are light armor. And so you get to add your full dexterity bonus to that. There's types of armor that give you a stealth disadvantage, no matter what happens, whether you are good at it or not good at it. Yeah, whether you're proficient, let's call it trained. Let's call it if you have armor training. Well, we're going to use proficiency because that's what they use, but it drives me out of my mind. Shouldn't use that word. So, for example, padded armor always gives you disadvantage on stealth checks. So do scale mail, half plate, ring mail, chain mail, splint mail, and plate mail. Okay, cool. And that makes sense because that is kind of a well actually thing. that people have been bringing up for a long time. So I can see to a certain extent that's a tip of the hat to the well actually crowd. And it makes sense. It also makes sense that if you are proficient in the armor, then you shouldn't have to take the disadvantage. And that's a very elegant way of handling armor training. So if the wizard wants to wear a suit of armor, sure, they can. They also cannot cast spells, by the way, in the armor. So that's another thing to take into consideration. But it's a pretty elegant way of handling that. It starts to get a little inelegant because of the dexterity bonus modifiers, because what happens occasionally is they sort of leapfrog over each other a little bit. Our medium armors are hide, chain shirt, scale mail. I think hide armor actually gives you a disadvantage. Does it not? No, it doesn't. Okay. Chain shirt, scale mail, breastplate, half plate. And what starts to happen? I took a look here and made myself a little chart. And I figured, like, well, you know, where are you going to range? Are you going to range from like a dexterity of 8, which you could start out with if you decide to have a character that's not really, you know, that's where you put your low score. So here's the base armor class right here in the green. And then here's, like, let's see, right here in the red, I decided, well, here's where here's the best you could ever get at first level, because you're not going to have a dexterity of over 17, so you're not going to have more than +3. And here's the best you can ever get with a particular type of armor, is right here. And that's when you have the +5 for having a score of 20. So we start to compare apples to apples with these armors, and you start to find out what's going on. So with something like padded armor, the best you could ever possibly have for an armor class is 16, and that's with a 20. So at first level, best you're going to be is a 14. Same thing with leather. Same thing with studded leather. Okay, so you start out with the next set of armor, which is the medium. See if I can talk. So I should redo this video, but I can't because it's live. So you have things like hide armor. Well, the best you're ever going to be with that is 14, because you can't take more than the +2 armor class bonus. So it doesn't really matter if it's if you have like if you're wearing hide armor, or if you're wearing padded armor or leather armor, you could be just as good. Ditto, like if you're wearing the chain shirt, well, you could be just as good with studded leather if you have a better dexterity. Right out of the gate at first level. In fact, if you have that coveted 20 dexterity, 20 dexterity later on, or even if you get up to the 18, you can be better, wearing those light armors than you could be wearing the medium armors, because even if your dexterity is the same exact thing, it's not going to, you're not going to catch up. So there are armors like scale mail, breastplate, half plate, which give you the 60, which start out at 13, 14, and 15, and eventually you kind of can max out with a +2, even at first level, and have armor classes of 16 or 17. That's helpful. I have some kids in my game right now. That's what they have. They have armor classes of 16 because they can only wear scale mail because they're rangers. Then let's see, heavy armor, you've got ring mail, which is just kind of thrown in there, I think, as the cheap armor that maybe you can only afford ring mail, or maybe the orc can only afford ring mail, because it's only got an armor class of 14, but it's a heavy armor. In the old days, we were used to having that bit way back there with like something like studded leather, but no, it's not that. It's big, heavy, crappy armor, and the best armor class you're ever going to get with that is 14, because you can't use your dexterity modifier at all with heavy armor. You can use a max of +2 with light armor, and you can use, there's no penalty to your dexterity with medium armor. +2 with medium armor, no penalty to dexterity with light armor. Okay, yeah, I'm too tired to be doing this video, but here you go. Chainmail, it's a flat 16. So once again, you've got, it doesn't really matter if my character has scale mail and I have a +2 dexterity, or chainmail, same armor class. It tops out there. Splint mail, 17, and plate mail. Plate mail is king because you really can't get an 18 any other way except to have plate mail. The cool thing about heavy armors, though, is that you don't take a penalty for having crappy dexterity either. So you have an 18 with plate mail, even if you have an 8 dexterity. So that's pretty cool on that regard. So it's a little inelegant in how that works, but I understand why they're doing it. Despite the fact that it's a little wonky. I almost wish that the table like this that I made here was in the book, so you could kind of see what you're getting into and what the maximum benefit of any given armor is. Because a shield is +2 to your armor class. So the maximum armor class you can ever get outside of some kind of magical means is 20. And what's that for? That's, once again, no, you cannot cast spells and armor as long as you're proficient. You simply cannot do it. At least let me just double check here. Well, I suppose if you're some kind of warlock or whatnot. But for the most part, I don't think there's any real way for a wizard to become proficient in armor. Maybe there is. I don't know. Anyhow, this video ain't about that. But man, I'll look at it later to see if it is, because I really didn't want to make it too much about magic. I want to talk more about the armor class, because the entire game has armor class really kind of shrunk down to where it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 20. In fact, if you look at the instructions here in the Dungeon Master's Guide for how to make your own monsters, tops out at like armor class 19. Of course, it gives you all these different instructions about how you can put things together to make your challenge ratings different, and so of course it could probably be higher than that. And in fact, there are some monsters in the monster manual, I believe, who have armor classes that are greater than 20. Not very many. The game is built around the idea that you're supposed to hit monsters a lot. And apparently at the same time, they're supposed to hit you a lot. So that's why the armor system, the way it is, even though it's a little bit clunky, it's a little bit ugly, it's not quite as elegant, to my taste anyway, as it could be otherwise if, well, we won't go into all the details. Not quite as elegant. It still has kind of an elegance to it, because what it's trying to do is keep you from ever having an armor class better than 20, because the monsters are supposed to be able to hit you an awful lot too. And let me tell you, even just looking at some of the challenge rating 1 and 2 monsters in there with the +4, +5s to hit, they're going to hit you. And so that's a really, really interesting, thing that happens. And anyhow, that's it. But I'll talk to you guys later. So yeah, armor, a little bit ugly, a little bit clunky. At the end of the day, I understand why they did what they did, and so it works for what they want it to work for. The end.